Kia ora, wanako, and namaste, and thank you for coming today. When I got the email about today's provocation, Lost, I kind of stared at the blank screen for quite some time, and there's like a recurring motif in my creative process. I often get lost in thoughts and in ideas and kind of panic and freak out and stare out. And in that moment of reflection, I kind of realized that my life creatively and my practice has been driven by moments where I've been lost and where I found myself. So, starting us off, you have to get lost to be found. Lost, unable to find one's way, not knowing one's whereabouts. Lost, something that has been away or cannot be recovered. Lost for words, lost in translation, but not all is lost. So when I think about the word lost, the first thing that comes to mind is my nation, Sri Lanka. Otherwise known as the Pearl of the Orient, the Teardrop, and also known as the Lost Paradise. And before I tell you more about Sri Lanka, we'll come back to this, I want to start off with my origin story. I was born in the UK in 1980, and my parents moved to the UK to study. And the mythology goes that when my mom was pregnant with me, Dad and her had jumped on a subway, and they were travelling through. And the train just kept going and didn't stop. It went to a tunnel, the lights turned off, and it was in that moment of them being lost that I started to kick. So my birth happened on a train. I was also born on the 29th of February. So my birthday is kind of lost. But not all is lost. To celebrate my birth, the Queen gave every baby that was born in 1980 on a leap year £4 for every year the leap year occurred. So to the age of 20, I received in total £20. My parents lost their bank account, so we don't actually know where that money is. So somewhere in the UK, there's £20 accumulated interest. I could be quite rich right now. Just gonna jump through. This is my whānau. My family, when they moved to UK, my mum and dad, they eloped. They were from two different religions and two different castes and two different cultures. So they wanted to get away from their family as far away as they could and went to UK to study. And while they were there, they started missing the whānau. And in a way, when I was born, I was the kind of peace offering that they brought to try and bring these lost connections together, to connect us up. And the day that I moved to Sri Lanka in 1983 was when the civil war broke out. Now, for those of you who don't know much about Sri Lanka has two ethnic groups, the Tamils and the Sinhalese. The Sinhalese is the majority, and around 1970, Sri Lanka's government decided to make Sinhala the dominant culture, the national language. So Tamil, the language that my family speak, was banned. They weren't allowed to speak it in public places, and those who spoke Tamil were kind of marginalized and pushed aside. And this event, which will have a profound effect on my creative process and who I am as a person now, this is the Jack in the library, and during the riots, they burnt the library. And that's a very devastating thing for a community and for a culture, because this library in the subcontinent housed some of the best literature, some of the best art, some of the most beautiful works that was completely erased and taken away from our kind of memory and from our history. And I guess part of my creative process ever since has been to recreate, reimagine, and restore all of that was lost there, so that my people's legacy, their stories, can keep living on. I went ahead too soon, so I'm going to go back again. So when my family moved to Sri Lanka, we lived there for about 7 years, and as the war kept escalating, my parents felt that that wasn't a safe environment to raise me, so we moved to New Zealand, Aotearoa. And New Zealand was really interesting, because when we arrived in New Zealand, we found the place to be really quiet, completely silent, and there's a stillness in there. And it was a moment for me to be able to really get lost in thoughts. Suddenly the clutter, the noise, and all the chaos that my country had given me disappeared. I was able to lose all of that sense of trauma and this new profound place that we've come into. And it was around this time, So, it was in this time in New Zealand in 1990 on TV2, I would stumble across this film, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which will be a complete game changer for me. Now, who here has seen this film? Great. So the story goes, Indiana Jones on a plane crashes in India and stumbles upon a Kali cult. Unknown fact, when they were making the film, the depictions of Indians were so problematic that the Indians refused to get the film filmed in their nation. So Steven Spielberg and George Lucas moved over to Sri Lanka to film it. They got the Sri Lankans to pretend to be Indians, and if you watch the film, they're not speaking any Indian dialect, they're actually speaking Sinhalese. Watching this film for me, however, was a different experience because what I was seeing was brown people on stage and screen that I hadn't seen on main stage television for quite some time. Also, there were some really problematic depictions of South Asian culture on screen, which, again, at that time, I didn't quite understand, but later on, I would go on to dismantle and break. But the thing that really stuck for me around Indiana Jones is this idea of archaeology and being able to escalate and kind of go through the stratas to be able to find a truth, something that can exist beyond. And this will send me down a pathway of escaping, being lost in other worlds through VHS, through music, and through all these devices that we've now lost that we don't have anymore. So my parents enrolled me in St. Patrick's College as a Catholic boys' college in the hope that I would find myself. And no, I didn't. But what I did find was the drama department and the music department. And unlike all the other boys who were playing rugby and crooning songs to their ladies, I was dressing up with my mates in the theatre department, putting on little pantos and shows. But the other thing that I really found when I was in high school was my voice. My English teacher started really complimenting me on my words, and I started to have confidence in what I had to say, and I just found myself being able to articulate myself more profoundly on page and on writing than I would in person. While I was in school, we did West Side Story for our fifth form school production. Again, incredible production that had a profound effect on me because what I saw in there was all these Indian sensibilities of films that I'd grown up on, song, dance, and incredible set numbers. And this would motivate me for my creative practice, as I'll talk about later. So my parents wanted me to, as any migrant child, to be a doctor or either an engineer. I told them that I was going to do this and went to Otago University, lied, and ended up studying a Bachelor of Arts in theatre and music. And for 3 years, I kept this lie. And when my grades came back home and they opened my letter, they discovered that I in fact wasn't studying medicine. And at the same time I thought it would be amazing to come out to them, so I thought they could deal with both of these shots. And when I wanted to get me out, it did work. So, but the other thing about studying at Otago was I discovered Alan Hall. Alan Hall used to run this amazing lunchtime theatre. For $2 you can go see shows, but it's also a beautiful hot house, a space where you can go experiment and try things. And that's where I wrote my first play, a monologue. And the monologue was about me being lost and me trying to find myself and navigating. One of the things that I also discovered when I was in Otago was that I'm terrible at reading maps. If you put me in the navigating seat, terrible, I'll always get you lost. But now, thank God to technology, we can navigate ourselves through it. The one thing that I must telling you about is when we arrived in New Zealand, that first week when I was in school, there was a whole series of encounters where I would get lost, literally. Day one, we had orientation, and I'd never used the map before, and the school bus left me behind. Day two, we went to a swimming pool, my bag was stolen, so I had no clothes to go back home to. Day three, my lunch was lost. So it was a very traumatic 3 days of schools. But things are starting to lighten up here. Also, around this time when I was in university is when I would discover the internet, another portal to get lost into. And this is a lament to the days when my mum would pick up the phone and dial up, and all those downloads would be lost halfway. September 11th, another event that kind of brought back everything that I thought I'd lost. All the memories and all the trauma kind of came tumbling back. And I think, again, in this moment in Aotearoa, what I thought I'd lost, I realized I hadn't really quite shaken it off. And it really kind of made me lose sense of, I guess, lose my faith in humanity and my faith in hope. That didn't happen to me, luckily, because I stumbled on Amelie and Monsoon Wedding are two films that I was studying in uni that just brought and reviewed as a real sense of joy. There's something about the way these stories were articulated. There's something about representation that was presented to me that really profoundly, again, found me a moment to be found, which then leads me to New Zealand School of Drama. So when I was finishing uni, I was at a point in my career I wasn't quite sure what to do. I went and worked for ESR, Environmental Science and Research. That lasted for a year, and then I realized, no, I needed more. There was something in me that I needed to put out, and I wasn't quite sure in which way, and I tried music, I tried poetry, I tried writing, and I realized that maybe I needed to go get more training. So I went to drama school. And drama school is a very interesting experience. You spend 3 years with a close group of people, but in a sense they're molding you to be this practitioner. And at the core of it, we still keep asking, what is it that you want to say? And I didn't quite know what that was. I knew there was things I wanted to articulate, but I just didn't quite know how or if the world was kind of ready for that. So drama school is a very, interesting experience. But part of the drama school experience is that in my final year, I got to go back to UK. And I worked with a group of South Asian theatre companies, Tara Arts, Tamasha, and Kali Theatre. But also going back to UK meant that I could revisit all those parts that my parents had travelled through and kind of live their life and kind of imagine what things would have been for them, because they did that in the 70s, and here I am with all the privileges that I have, yet I don't know what I was complaining about because I had more opportunities and more options to me. And once I finished up in the UK, I kind of came back with this newfound hope that no, not everything is lost, there is something that I want to work with. And I joined up this theatre company called Tawata, and Tawata is a leading Cook Island Māori theatre company. And the thing that I learned in there is it's a writer-driven theatre company. So most of the support is given to the writers, because the importance of the words is what kind of really fueled my creativity. So through that company, I was able to support and learn the craft of theatre making, finding the confidence to put my words on page and get other people to say it. And through Tawata, I performed, wrote and directed I wrote and performed my first solo show called The Morning After, which in a way was bringing everything that I've been kind of bottling away onto a page. And The Morning After is set in 2004 during the Boxing Day tsunami. And the story is about a young Kiwi boy who goes back to his village in Sri Lanka, but his entire village has been wiped away because of the tsunami. So this idea of what do you do when the past doesn't exist anymore for you? And in a way, that was my way of talking about all the things that I've kind of encountered through my life. It was also a way for me to talk about the war without having to go there, because I was trying to find metaphors and other ways to talk about trauma and about loss. And the work was well received. But what I also found was that my voice was a lone voice, and I needed to work with more people. So I then adapted that solo work into an ensemble work and kind of opened it up. And interestingly, two of these actors are now on the stage working on Tarak Tarak. But yeah, The Morning After was my first, I guess, work that I shared in public to a mainstream Aotearoa audience. And then as time would go, I would grow in more confidence in being able to articulate and keep putting more works, which would lead me to forming my own company, Agro Productions. And Agro means to reach the zenith, or to get to the top of the hill. And the show that we made here is called Mumbai Monologues. And Mumbai Monologues was essentially looking at all the queer stories from India. And I guess in this time was when I started looking at what are the voices that we're not hearing on our stages, what are the people we're not seeing, and what is my responsibility to keep amplifying and making space for these practitioners or for the experiences that I want to put in there. And in this time, I started working with Prayas Theatre. Now, Prayas is a leading Indian theatre company based here in Auckland, and they've been around for 14 years. Growing up in Wellington, there isn't much of a theatre scene for South Asians, and so when I came here, I was it's a community theatre company, but I was moved by the fact that I could be in a room with 40, 50 other South Asian creatives, so suddenly I didn't feel lost anymore. I was able to find a collective voice I could grow with them. And Prayas gave me a lot of initiative and a lot of opportunities to keep flexing my writing and directing muscles that I can develop as an artist. And the first show that I directed with Prayas was Rudali. And Rudali means, well, it's called The Mourner. The story is about a woman who cries at people's funerals as a profession, because in India, in certain rural parts, once someone passes away, they hire a team of mourners to turn up, and the more people that turn up to mourn for you, the more successful you are. And this story looks at a woman who no longer has any tears left to mourn, and I was really interested in that, and I guess there's a thematic link that starts appearing with all the works that I started investigating with. Rudali was staged at the Herald Theatre. It was my first time directing a large ensemble cast, and I'm always trying to find how do I imbue my works that talk about dark and heavy stuff, but with light and joy in it as well, because there's hope. Hope is really important. And the next show that I was directing is called The Charandas Chore, which means the thief, the honest thief. And with this work, what I wanted to explore was the idea of lost theatrical traditions that even within our own community that we no longer kind of embrace or no longer celebrate folk theatre. And Charandas Chore was a playful, joyful work that just looks at the old folk theatre, street theatre of India. Which brings me to the first work that I kind of devised and created with a company called Swabumi. Swabumi was my first kind of work that is set entirely in New Zealand. It looks at the different waves of migrants that arrived in New Zealand, starting from 1800s right to present day. So I was really interested in those who came to work in Pukekohe, those who fought in Gallipoli, and then the migrants that came in the 40s, 50s, and looking at different ways. But the stories that I wasn't seeing enough on our screens, I wasn't seeing in the libraries, so I wasn't hearing people talk about. So in a way, from this point onwards, my artistic journey became more and more concrete in being able to find those lost stories and giving them a space and a place. So these are just images from the production. This is a story about these two women who go on a hike in Otago, and looking at this story about a gold miner who was a profound worker in Otago. There's a statue for him, but again, not many people know about him. Stories about the soldiers that fought at Gallipoli, and then and a conglomeration of all these stories and converging. Because I think that's the magic about theatre, is you can make things happen that didn't quite happen, or relive stories, or recreate opportunities for people from different times, different places to come together. And then my first work that I performed for the Auckland Arts Festival was called Tea. And Tea is me kind of delving even more deeper into my Sri Lankan heritage and kind of honouring that moment of the burnt library that I was talking about. Tea, again, looks at a traversing time period. Again, starts at 1800, but goes right into the future. And with Tea, I was really interested in looking at the stories of the marginalised tea workers in Sri Lanka. And essentially, looking at all the stories and histories of my family that I could put on stage, because when we left Sri Lanka during the war, all of our family photos, apart from the one that I showed you, was all destroyed. So I have no memories of the past. Everything that we had was lost. So this work was a way for me, for my community, to put everything and kind of excavate and also present a past that no longer exists for us. And interestingly, when I was writing Tea, a week before we started rehearsals, my computer died, and essentially 3 years worth of work was lost. And it's interesting what you remember when you're going to rewrite, because obviously the bits that wasn't good, you never say that. So it's a great editing process. But in that moment of loss, being completely in panic, that blank stare, there was an absolute moment of clarity that kind of came through. And I guess it's coming back to the kind of recurring motive that you talked about, in that moment of loss, the moment when you feel like there is, staring at the abyss, what comes after is the most interesting thing. It is that resilience, that hope is what has motivated and driven my creative practice. Tea went on to win overall production at the Auckland Arts Festival. And again, it was a beautiful opportunity for me to bring the Sinhalese and the Tamil community who have been at war back home here in Aotearoa to sit together and lament, celebrate, and kind of grieve for our nation and heal from that. Just from that. Right. And then earlier this year, I got the opportunity to direct for Auckland Theatre Company, A Fine Balance, which is based on Washington Mysteries novel. Has any of you guys read this before? Some of you have? Again, a beautiful story that looks at the emergency that happened in India when Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency. A part of history, again, often not talked about, not many people know about it. And again, me kind of like looking at amplifying or putting to light these experiences of people and times and history that we don't hear about. A Fine Balance is a story of hope. It's a story about people that are lost within the political system and how they manage to endure and get through to it. Which leads me to here, right now, this moment now. My art was in a way is a culmination of everything I've talked about. Looking at Indiana Jones, those VHS systems that don't exist anymore, devices that we've lost, ways of thinking, recreating the past, celebrating the future, looking at West Side Story. In a way, it's a culmination of everything that's informed me, and a big part of that is being, I think, for me, when I look at it, I would say my greatest asset, or my greatest inheritance is the inheritance of loss. And that has always kind of driven me, that has always motivated me, that has always fueled me. The premise of Tarak is about a brother and a sister who have to complete an incomplete film when their father dies midway during the shoot, and the people that have gathered are just 5 misfits, and they're the ultimate underdogs, and no one has turned up in this production company to finish the film, and these 5 have to create the ultimate Bollywood spaghetti western. But I guess for me, as I look at all of these works and I reflect now and here in front of you, the journey has been that with each iteration, with each work, a willingness to be open to the possibility of being lost, being open to that and being unafraid of the unknown and kind of optimistically staring blankly at that screen with the hope of what will come next. Hear that? Thank you. That's me. Like sweating like that.
Don't go anywhere. Any questions for Ahi? About the performance? Yes. Oh shit, sorry.
Oh, I see. You buy 3 tickets for that now. Yes.
I was just wondering, thank you, that was amazing. I was just really interested in your perspective of the emergency in India in 1975. And I was wondering how you see your work. I don't know, like D.S. Naipaul's writing about India at that time. How do you see your work in relation to maybe those sort of ideas about, I guess, like Hindu sort of philosophy and narratives of like hope, but also how it should be seen as kind of nihilism, I guess, like how he talks about it?
I think, like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, these are 2 great Indian epics, and they're quite broad and grand in scale. And I guess when I make work, I'm making work for a predominantly South Asian community, because I believe that there's a universality that comes through the specificity. So when I was making A Fine Balance, that's an existing text. So there's no political view that I have on it because I'm so far removed and so distant from it. However, what I do want is people to have conversations around this. I don't think I am well informed enough to talk about the politics of India. However, I do have a curiosity and I do feel that it's something that unjust. And this is my way of kind of waking our community that's here to actively talk about past wrongs, or how do we not repeat the mistakes of the past. It's really interesting. Like, just a couple of weeks ago we had the verdict on the Babur Masjid, and I had to revisit all of that time in 94. For those of you, for the context, there was an ongoing long-term court case around the sacred site where there's the Hindus claim that Ayodhya, where Ram's birthplace is, and there's also a Muslim mosque in there and around who has the origins of that place. And that is a long-term conversation that's going in. But these are conversations that we've been having over and over again over time. And I guess as artists, it's my responsibility just to keep highlighting it and questioning it. I don't have the answers, but my way is just to keep asking questions.
Can I just get you to give some general comments on writing for a multi-ethnic audience? You know, to talk about what you did to this lady just now. The reason I asked the question is a bit of a preface, but I see that Anne O'Brien is in the audience. I've been to every Auckland Writers' Festival right from the first one. I'm probably the only Asian who's been to every one. And a few years ago, the great Sri Lankan writer Michelle de Kretser turned out to do a book reading. And I looked at the audience. The audience was 95% white. I saw 6 Sri Lankans. So afterwards, I went up to the book signing because the novel was magnificent. And I asked her, don't you feel uncomfortable having basically a vastly white audience and you're Sri Lankan and there must be a big Sri Lankan audience in Australia? She's Burger, and she said to me, Ramesh, if I relied on my ethnic community, I would not make a living as a writer. Basically, the Tamils don't want to read my writing because I'm a Burger, the Sinhalese don't want to read it, and the young people are stuck on Instagram. So I write for a bourgeois, white audience, and you look like one of those anyhow.
That's a really beautiful question. I mean, I think I'm constantly aware in our territory of the multiculturalism that exists in here. And again, like I said, my specificity is to a South Asian community, but I'm always interested in the kind of profound specificity of the human needs, the human wants, that kind of process all cultural wants and needs. When I did the morning after, that was just around the Christchurch earthquakes. So when I did that show in Wellington, and then we took it down to Christchurch, what the community there saw was a story about a community rebuilding itself, a community trying to come out of a natural disaster and trying to band together. So even though my specificity was to a Sri Lankan community and I was writing work about our loss, there was a universality in that. And I guess over my career, little by little, my hope is that I keep increasing the audience and the engagement with that. I've worked both within 2 different spaces, so around with our direct community space in my own reo, in my own language, but also when I think about speaking to my younger generation, my brothers and his generation, they're just not so fluent and proficient in Tamil. And trying to get them out to our spaces is much harder. So it's in here, in public spaces, then they can feel like they can be seen, be recognized and be acknowledged. So that's part of the reasoning why I work in that. But yeah, my hope and my want is that we will keep growing.
Right. Thank you.
Can you guys please join me in thanking Ahi?